Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
This is Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party and the County Chair of the Suffolk County Republican Party. Joining us once again is our good friend, Eric Levine, noted attorney, commentator, and essayist. And Eric is just run from the Fox studios where Neil Cavuto commenting on the national elections going forward this November. And we're honored and privileged to have such a TV star with us, Jesse. I don't know about you, but I'm very impressed.
Autographs at the end of the show.
I feel so fortunate. I mean, I feel like,
Eric is the star. So I want to begin, gentlemen, by talking about the Hunter Biden verdict, where Hunter Biden, the president's son, first time in history a president's son has been convicted of federal felonies. My thoughts on this. And some people may be surprised by what I have to say, and others may say, well, of course. And I've thought about it very seriously. It was clear to me from the very beginning that he was guilty of these crimes. He falsified official business records when he bought the gun, when he used the gun, when he applied for the gun. He was convicted on all counts. He was a drug addict and a user at the time he filled out the forms. He knew he was, and he had kept the gun in his possession for about 10 days until his girlfriend got rid of the gun. He didn't get rid of it on his own accord. So clearly, there was no doubt in my mind. It was a paper case, as we say in the business. It was a document case. It was perfectly clear. He even talked about it on TV interviews and he even admitted it in his own book. So why this case even went to trial is beyond me, frankly. And Mr. Abbey Lowell is supposed to be this great criminal lawyer, they tell me. Why he tried this case is totally beyond me. They should have taken a plea on this. The real reason he went to trial on this was because they had totally screwed up the original plea bargain deal because they tried to snooker the judge, the federal judge, Noriega, on a plea deal which would have totally immunized Hunter Biden from all the other crimes he's guilty of, which is including, being an influence peddler, being someone who didn't register as a foreign agent, income tax issues, failure to file, failure to pay, fraud. They wanted to get him totally off the hook. The judge understood this. She wouldn't take this deal. It fell apart. They should have immediately gone back and say, okay, we'll take the deal on a plea deal, on a misdemeanor and move on. They foolishly didn't, and the kid is now exposed to lots of years in jail, which I don't believe he's going to get from this judge or any other judge. Now, what are my thoughts? This whole thing was Weiss, now the special counsel, the U.S. Attorney, Delaware. This case was a diversion from the real deal, which was the influence peddling and the money making by the Biden family for doing nothing and getting paid a lot. Hopefully doing nothing that they didn't sell out the country by official acts by this president, but certainly for doing nothing in terms of real services. And you're talking about tens of millions of dollars. And that was the real question. And Weiss, to his shame and to the discredit of the U.S. Department of Justice, allowed the statute of limitations to run on that. This was all diversion. This was all nonsense. Having said all of that, Jesse and Eric, I want to say, I don't think the kid should go to jail. I think the kid should be put into a counseling program. I do not feel anything but sympathy for the kid. He's done a lot of bad things. He has a moral compass that needs to be straightened out. But I don't take any pleasure in seeing a person like that being destroyed. I hope this does not destroy him. I hope it helps redeem him and straightens him out. The same token, by the way, parenthetically, I would love if Governor Hochul would pardon Donald Trump from the 34 convictions of trumped-up felon charges that Alvin Bragg brought against him. This country does not need any more of this weaponization by political parties. And who was the political party who did this? It was not the Republican Party, folks. And I tell you that as the House Democrat. It was the Democratic Party that weaponized the criminal justice system. So, Jesse, I'd like your thoughts on what I just said, and then I want Eric's, and then we can go into larger questions. First, you, Jesse.
Thank you. And I agree. I mean, a lot of us were concerned about the home field advantage of this case, the fact that the Biden family was so well renowned and so beloved and entrenched in Delaware. It was a Delaware courtroom. But you pointed out to the judge, and I think the judge that struck down the original plea agreement, that was the path to justice in this issue, where they were just trying to take a blanket type of immunity deal for the Bidens for the Bidens and family in general. And it failed. And this is nothing like, this is exactly what happens to Democrats all the time when they weaponize the system. Gianaris in New York had to be greedy with redistricting. And what did he do? The courts overturned him, and we went from a potential of 4 Republican House seats to now 11 Republican House seats as a result of the court-ordered redistricting from 2022. And here's the same thing. The Democrats don't want to play on an even playing field. And, we've questioned whether or not this was going to be fair. We had the First Lady and her family in the courtroom on a regular basis, trying to, which some people said tried to influence the jury as deliberations move forward. We saw this defense attorney make what pundits have said in the law. Experts say that were mistakes in the defense, but it all boils down to this. I've always been told, and we've always been told, the federal government never loses a paper case. This is a paper case. This is his own words in a book. This is his own handwriting on an application. They should never have been able to even thought about this being a loss in the courtroom. Yet there was a lot of thoughts that because of influence from the outside that would happen. Like you, I think that that Hunter Biden needs help. I'm not sure what form that is in. I believe that if everyone should be treated fairly under the law and no one is above the law, then he should be treated like everyone else and not special in sentencing.
Thank you. Eric, your turn.
Yeah, so there are two things that really strike me about it, in addition to the things that you and Jesse were saying, which I generally agree with. I'm torn on the issue of whether or not he should get jail time. Remember, this involves a gun, and the illegal possession of a gun, and either we're interested in clearing the streets of guns and gun violence, or we're not. And I don't think we want to have one set of rules for some people who carry guns and another set of rules for other people who carry guns, particularly if you're the president's son. So I'm torn on that. I wasn't in the courtroom every day, so I don't know what all the facts are, but that's one that kind of strikes me. But you hear some of the commentators on the left. Chuck Todd from MSNBC is a perfect example of this. He's trying to make the case that the Hunter Biden conviction is Donald Trump's worst nightmare because it proves that there's no lawfare, that there's no two-tiered criminal justice system. Of course, it's utter nonsense. In the Trump case, you have no case and one is fabricated and completely out of the ether, and he's convicted on those. Whereas in the Hunter Biden case, you have a case that's rock solid, and that they've worked really hard to try to make it disappear into the ether, so he wouldn't be prosecuted. And that was the point of the original plea deal. So I think those comparisons fall flat on their face. But I think the biggest point that we should make isn't really tied specifically to the Hunter Biden charges. It's about the Hunter Biden laptop. We all go back to 2020, and we remember 51 former intelligence officers of the United States, at the request of then campaign chairman Antony Blinken, sign a false statement saying that the Hunter Biden laptop has all the earmarks of foreign intelligence information, Russian disinformation. And what is the chief piece of evidence that the government puts into the case in the Hunter Biden matter? The laptop. That was their primary evidence in this case, Hunter Biden's laptop. So Joe Biden has a lot to answer for, and I'm very curious. I hope he's asked the question at the upcoming debate, basically phrased along the lines of, at the last debate in 2020, you told the country that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, and yet the government used that laptop as its chief piece of evidence in the case against your son. When did it come to your attention that that was not disinformation, and when were you going to tell the American people? I'm very curious what his response to that would be.
I think that's an excellent question. I mean, the problem is that they tried to be clever in the wording of that letter. Their claim is they never actually said that it was Russian disinformation. They said it had all the earmarks.
Yeah, it's too cute by half.
As the Brits would say, too cute by half. Yeah. Because the implication was perfectly clear that this was false information. But they never cleaned it up. And they should have cleaned it up, because the reports now are that as early as years before, the FBI had possession of it, and they had verified, in fact, that this was a true recording. All the recordings were true, and this was the laptop of Hunter Biden. So at the time, there were FBI types who knew at the highest level that this was a true and accurate instrumentality, as well as the information contained in it was true and accurate. And then that leads me to the question, Jesse and Eric, why didn't the FBI tell the then President of the United States, Barack Obama, why didn't they tell the then Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, what they knew? And
how do you know they didn't?
That's the whole point. So the question is, either the FBI failed in its obligation,
which I don't believe they did.
I have no reason to believe that they failed in their obligation, but I have no facts one way or the other. But the fact of the matter is, if Obama and Biden had gotten the heads up on this, it seems to me that they were part of this process of misleading the American people. And if you want to use a standard for prosecuting people about influencing an election by false information, that's what you're talking about with Trump in New York, then why isn't that standard applicable to the Bidens, or as well as Hillary Clinton on the Steele dossier, which is also a fraudulent piece of information, which they relied on, and they misled the federal courts, the FISA courts, to issuing warrants. So let's be clear. This is a very dangerous game when you start making these accusations. And it's also a very dangerous game when you're taping people, when they're making statements saying, well, it has all the earmarks of, and let it lie there. Or, my son never made money with the Chinese. Well, another lie, as Eric has pointed out, which we could confront the
or that he never discussed his son's business with him.
Yeah, except they had numerous meetings,
and the laptop contains evidence that they discussed it.
Of course.
Yeah,
so the whole thing is, so the Bidens are free to say whatever they want, but the reality is they had business dealings with all kinds of foreign nationals. The kid never signed up as a foreign agent. The brother never signed up as a foreign agent. There's still the concern about who was the big guy who was getting the 10%. Why did the son say he's very upset about paying for his father's expenses? There's a lot there, and it all got buried because Weiss buried it and let the statute of limitations lapse. Gentlemen, I want to switch gears.
If I could, in just one instance, before we switch gears, because I think it would be interesting for our listeners to get your take from a lawyer and for someone who sat on the bench. When you take the two cases in front of you, as you and Eric and we all agreed and have said this over the last few weeks and months, that there was a trumped up, no pun intended, well, maybe a pun intended, a trumped up case in New York where they resurrected charges that didn't exist. Here, there wasn't. There in the Hunter Biden case, there is evidence, hard evidence, is his application, his own words and such. But isn't also the difference between the two cases in how, I should say, the judge in both cases conducted the operations of the court, made the instructions to the jury, to the two respective juries and such. Do you see that there was a difference in how the judge in New York conducted his courtroom as opposed to the judge in Delaware?
Excellent question, Eric.
that may have led to this to these two decisions. Excuse me.
Well, I mean, again, I wasn't in the courtroom every day, but from what I could read, the answer to your question is yes. There's a tremendous difference. I mean, I think part of that difference is defined by the difference between the federal bench and the state bench. You know, federal bench judges are appointed. They get nominated. Typically what happens is the senators from those states make a recommendation, and then it's put in front of the president. They try to pick, if you're from the opposite party, you try to pick somebody that at least be palatable to the president so that he'll approve them. So that's with the U.S. attorney. No, but with judges, they're nominated, they're selected, but they're appointed by the president. That's fine. So you generally have a higher caliber of judge on the federal bench. That's the first thing. In New York State,
I respectfully dissent from that, by the way.
Well, I said generally there are some very notable exceptions. Present company is exempted from that. Of course, he's the highest quality.
We can't say that about the Ninth Circuit either, right? Out of California.
Well said, Jesse.
Well, the Ninth Circuit under Trump started changing rather dramatically. You have different appointments. There's a perfect example. But in New York State, and Richard could speak to this better than any of us about how judges are selected. You go to these nominating committees, and they say, okay, we have all our political hacks together, and today we need a green person with one leg. Do you have anybody in mind? And then if you get because it's a one-party state, if you've been in the system long enough and you meet the criteria of a green person with one leg, you become a judge. It has very little to do with your judicial temperament or your legal capabilities. You do have, I mean, obviously some judges are better than others, and there are some very high-quality judges on the New York trial courts. But you have a lot of judges who really should not be there, and the judge in the Trump criminal prosecution is the perfect example. But I think, Richard, you're the one best positioned to discuss this.
The system
because you're such a great judge.
Well, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Ask my daughters. Look, don't ask my wife, but ask my daughters. Look, let's be clear. The big debate has always been, is it better to have an appointed system for judges or an elected system? And when I was a much younger person, I used to believe an elected system was really great because it's more democratic with a small d. The fact of the matter is people, when they go to vote, have no idea who they're voting for. And as Eric correctly points out, when you have these party conventions, which are controlled by the political machines, then, of course, they put through who they want because the nomination comes out of a convention, and the people who delegate the convention are really party people. So it really is controlled. But not all judges in New York State are elected. For example, I was an appointed judge, both to the criminal court, first by Giuliani, then Bloomberg, to the Supreme Court by Judith Kaye and Jonathan Lippman. So I'm the beneficiary of an appointed system. Now, an appointed system, I must say to you, is not a perfect system because it depends who the ultimate appointing authority is and what the screening.
But it gave us you.
But it gave me, and that was fine. But the fact of the matter is, not everybody had my credentials or some of the qualifications of some of my really esteemed colleagues. I saw people put on the bench who shouldn't be there, who had ideological biases, and particularly during the de Blasio years on the criminal court, people were put on there because of their ideological biases. They denied that, of course, but that was the litmus test. I don't think you should have ideological litmus tests for the appointment of judges. I think you should have the best women and men based on temperament, education, experience. That's what counts. Integrity. That's what you want. My standard always for myself when I assumed the bench was this. I wanted to treat the people who came before me free of prejudice and bias. I tried to do justice without fear or favor. I wanted people to be treated in a way that I'd want my own children to be treated if they were facing the judge. And that was always my standard. We're going to have to take a break. In a couple of minutes, we'll be back. We're going to have the district attorney of Albany County, David Soros, who is running for re-election this year. He has a primary fight on June 25th, Democratic primary up in Albany. We're going to have Mr. Soros on. He's a great DA, and I look forward to having the conversation with him. Please stay tuned to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia, Vice Chair of the State Republican Party, County Chair of the Suffolk Party, esteemed essayist, political commentator, attorney, and TV talking head, Eric Levine. We'll be back in just a few moments. Stay with us, please.
Let the Record Show is on the air.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Komm du noch?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
My favorite thing about Shipt since I signed up for Target Circle 360? No price markups when I order same-day delivery from tons of local stores. Only a handful of alcohol retailers and items don't count. I won't lie, I've had too much fun being like, markups on groceries? Not in my fridge. Markups on pet food? Not for my DOG. Markups on tools, electronics, home goods, meds? Not in my house. Anyway, it's awesome. Order now at shipt.com/360. Terms apply.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Eric Levine, noted commentator, essayist, star of TV, soon-to-be movies, a common sense Republican. Jesse Garcia, the vice chair of the state Republican Party, county chair of the Suffolk Party. And we are indeed honored and privileged to have the district attorney of Albany County, David Soros, on the phone with us. Mr. District Attorney, welcome to Let the Record Show. We're delighted to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for your kind invitation. It's wonderful to be with you all today.
So let me begin by saying, people say to me, why is the Albany DA's race so important? And in my not so humble opinion, it may be the most important district attorney's race in the entire state of New York. It goes to the future of the survival of the state of New York. You have been a voice of common sense, of reason, of courage in fighting against these crazy far left agendas which have emasculated law enforcement and prosecution function and judicial branch because of all these so-called feel-good criminal justice reforms. Very few of the DAs in this state have had the courage and the vision and the understanding to do what you've done. As a result of that, David, Governor David Paterson has endorsed you, and he did so last week when we were all talking together in Katz and Cosby. And I reinforce that. I think you're a great DA, and I think you have the vision and the experience to do the job. So the question becomes, why is there a candidate against you, and what's your vision of the position?
Well, Your Honor, I think you hit it on the head. I know that I have, and I say this with a lot of pride, I know that I have earned this primary. I've earned this primary because I've been extremely vocal about the failings of not just bail reform, but the series of all of these reforms that have seemed to attack and undermine the continuum of events all along the criminal justice system, from the way that law enforcement engages with criminals on the street, as you know, and with lot of the misdemeanors, quality of life offenses. We issue what I call disappearance tickets now, all the way to discovery that have turned prosecutors into clerks, all the way to the HALT Act that prevents inmates from receiving proper sanctions for misbehavior or violent attacks on other inmates or on our employees there. So we have been living in this fantasy world of daydream believers who believe that criminals keep appointments, daydream believers that also believe that if a 16-year-old is carrying a loaded firearm, that individual should go to family court and receive juice and crackers and a stern, lecture. But this is where we are. But philosophically, having an opinion about these reforms is one thing. Watching the results and the bloodshed that is happening in streets of Albany, in Albany County, right under the nose of our legislators, and for them not to take note, is just unconscionable.
Well, it seems to me, and then I'm going to ask Jesse and Eric to talk to you. It seems to me that they're running a candidate against you because you haven't folded like a lot of other people have in public life. You're trying to do the right thing. You took an oath of office to protect and defend the public safety and to enforce the laws, and you're trying to do that. And when you see the legislature run wild going the other way, being more pro-criminal than they are pro-public safety, you've spoken up. So when you say you've earned the primary, it's because you have annoyed the powers that be. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. You have to remember, sir, that this is also the same group that denied me the opportunity to present to them when I was scheduled to go before them a few years ago. And
the state legislature, you mean?
Yeah, the state legislature, and they sought the testimony of someone else. And I'm not, and sir, I've never been the type to just say things to just to garner attention. When I have 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds that we've apprehended with magazines totaling 100 to 120 capacity, and those kids are just returned right back into the street to commit more violent crimes. That's not just me having a philosophical disagreement with a policy. The result of these policies have been blood and chaos and death. And I use these words because that is the truth. There's no way to soft sell the results of these laws, and they don't want to hear it. They just don't want to hear it because it's not politically in their interest to hear it or acknowledge the truth.
Jesse.
Mr. District Attorney, it's a pleasure to meet you. And listen, I am the resident Republican here. I'm the chairman out in Suffolk County and a vice chair of our state committee. And I can say this based on your record that was shared with me as you go through this. You are probably one of the Republican Party's worst nightmares to try and run against. Someone who is fair-minded, fair. You look at things with integrity, and you have an emphasis on keeping the electorate and the citizenry safe. I mean, you have not fallen into this woke issue. So I can tell you from a political opponent point of view, and I'm a chairman that has knocked off a sitting district attorney here in Suffolk County. You are the type of district attorney and candidate that we in the Republican Party are fearful of, because those are the ones that are tough to take to, basically defeat and replace. So I wish you well in your primary. It's good to see that. And I think one of the testaments for an individual as a prosecutor, a professional prosecutor like yourself, is when you have working men and women supporting you. The fact that you have Teamsters and the local unions and trades backing your candidacy in this primary is a testament that you are there for middle class families and there for Main Street businesses and there for the electorate in general. So best of luck.
I thank you very much, and I really appreciate your comments. You've got a great DA in Ray Tierney, who
we do.
It puts He puts people, communities, and businesses first, and that is the role, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And I think it's even more incumbent, specifically on prosecutors, that when we see policies that are having the kind of impact that we know these reforms are having, it is incumbent upon us to speak regardless of party. But this campaign, although my name will be on a ballot on the 25th of this month, in 2 weeks from yesterday, actually, although it's my name and my opponent's name on that ballot, this is more than a campaign about two people with opposing views. This is a campaign about the policy and the direction that our state has gone. Those who agree with these policies that now view criminals as the new victim class, those individuals will vote for my opponent. But those individuals who want to restore order and peace to our communities and are tired of having to wait to get their shampoo unlocked by a person in a store, I think those are the people that are going to vote for me. But as with all elections, as you know, sir, it requires financial support. It requires boots on the ground, and that's it's the old-fashioned way, but that's the way that we're going to win this.
Eric,
if I may just interject one more minute, and I apologize because you just touched upon something, and the judge alluded to it. For the longest time here in Suffolk County, we had politics and partisan politics playing too much of a role in the prosecutor's office and district attorney's office, whether it be Republican, Democrat. The last DA, the previous DA is now in federal prison. There was a lot of political gamesmanship being played. It seems that the same type of political apparatus, partisan apparatus, is trying to take you out. Someone who follows the law and someone who's outspoken about needing the tools to keep the citizenry safe. So for the people in Albany, don't let power brokers that are not seen and not heard make you less safe in your county.
Well said. Eric.
Well, first, I want to take exception to what Jesse said about being the resident Republican. Last time I checked, I'm a registered Republican, but we'll let that pass.
Every other week.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Mr. District Attorney, thank you for joining us. So I have a question. We're witnessing on our college campuses explosions of anti-Semitism, people who are violating the rules of these universities and colleges to set up tent cities. We're seeing explosions of anti-Semitism in the streets of in cities across the country. New York is no exception. Now, I went to Union College up in Schenectady. I know it's a neighbor of yours. I don't think you have jurisdiction over there, but I do know there were incidences at Union involving anti-Semitism. But my question goes to the issue of when large groups like these pro-Hamas protesters, anti-Israel protesters, take to the streets without permits and violations of the law that interfere with people, pedestrian traffic, just being able to drive your car down the street, get over a bridge, or just the other day there was the Nova Festival. They were paying a tribute to those Israelis that were killed on October 7th at a peace concert. How does the district attorney, or how do you think the district attorney or law enforcement should deal with these mass illegal protests that are going on without the proper permits and are interfering with the day-to-day life of the average citizen, and in many respects are actually threatening physically the well-being of their fellow citizen?
Well, what's interesting? What's interesting here in the Capitol is the fact that, look, this is the place that you're supposed to come and protest, right? We're talking about the place where all your laws are made and budgets are passed, and therefore, like Washington, D.C., where you can, walk from one block to the next and see all of the varieties of issues, being represented in the form of protest. What I've observed over the course of the last several years is just how we've gone from the peaceful protesting to protests that are violent, and protests that are designed not to necessarily deliver a message, but designed to interrupt the daily lives of people who really are disconnected from the issue at hand. the things that frustrate me so much is when you see protesters who, let's say, for example, block a parking garage, and the mom or the dad that needs to get to the babysitter to get his or her child, they're kept from achieving that. People who are, protesting along the roadways, thereby interfering in the average person's life. I am frustrated by those protesters. My rule here in Albany County, if it's a peaceful protest where there is no harm to property, no injury to police and law enforcement, then there's a way to resolve those protests in those cases. But for those individuals who are here, who are storming, the Capitol, injuring police, really doing their very best to interrupt the lives of everyday citizens, those are the people who I would prosecute, and people who I find to be the most, I hate to use the word annoying, but those aren't folks that are necessarily here to address issues or exchange ideas. Well,
I think that's very well said, Mr. District Attorney. We're on the phone with David Soros, who's the District Attorney of Albany County, and I want to reiterate, and in fact, just today, John Cassimatidis and I had a meeting with the Deputy Mayor of New York City, Phil Banks. He's the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety. And the concern is that if you don't have public safety, you don't have civilization. People flee with their feet. They get out of town. They don't want to be confronted by this. Life is tough enough. You want to be able to go to your job, go to your doctor's appointment, go to school, go to entertainment without being harassed, without being intimidated. And Deputy Mayor Banks fully understands that, and it's clear, David Soros, District Attorney of Albany County, you understand this as well. But again, it's a larger question. And again, the symbolism of your primary election is very significant, because back 4 years ago during the presidential election, you had the Black Lives Matter protests and Antifa, and you had all these commentators saying mostly peaceful demonstrations. Well, they were intimidating people at the courthouses. They were breaking down barriers at the federal courts. The people were killed. The fire set all over the city. Property was damaged. When you have a tolerance for that kind of lawlessness, you break down civilization. Without public safety, you have no civilization. So your fight, Mr. District Attorney, is to fight back and protect the citizenry. And when you win on June 25th, it seems to me you're sending a message to all of New York State that public safety and civilization and respect for your fellow human beings' rights is paramount, and we have to have it. Last word for you, Mr. Soros, before we get off. By the way, what's your website so people, if they want to contribute, can do that?
It's davidsoros.com.
Great. Last word, Mr. District Attorney David Soros.
I can't thank you enough for having me on your show and for having and engaging in this discussion. As you already stated, that this is not a race that is just about the election of the district attorney. This is a race that is largely about the future of our community. Winning not only sends the message that people in our community want public safety and law and order, but my hope is that my victory will also help other elected officials summon the courage to say publicly that which I know they say behind closed doors. And so what I need is just the support of New Yorkers. This race in Albany County, although we're here 2.5 hours from the city, there's a lot riding on this campaign, and we need the resources and the help and the support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. District Attorney David Soros. On behalf of all of us here, we wish you well, and you have my personal endorsement, because I think you're a great district attorney. I think you're an honorable man, and the people of Albany are lucky to have you as their district attorney. Thank you so much, Your Honor. Of course. This is Let the Record Show. We'll be back in a moment with more interesting conversation. Please stay tuned.
This is Let the Record Show.
Lights, camera, innovation. Walt Disney Studios chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business to transform the movie-making process. Together, we kept a remote production hub in Hawaii in sync with a team in California to bring Lilo and Stitch to theaters this summer. This is picture-perfect collaboration. This is Walt Disney Studios with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel or that white chocolate mocha. Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
Shopping is hard, right? But I found a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And he sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what works and send back the rest. It's so easy. Make style easy. Get started today at StitchFix.com/Spotify. That's StitchFix.com/Spotify.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength, Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
We're back on Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, Eric Levine, noted commentator, essayist, attorney, star of screen, stage, movies, television. So, I'll tell you what gets me very perplexed, which is you have the Democrats, my people, so-called, the Democratic Party. They're the ones who are saying that Trump is a threat to the constitutional order. He's a threat to democracy. So, gentlemen, I want to pose the questions to you. Who is the real threat to America's constitutional order, to the rule of law, to civility, and making the system work? Jesse, I'll begin with you.
I think the best way to take a look at this is let's just look at the record. Let's look at the record of those political parties or individuals that are looking to make the following changes. Packing the court, because they'll be able to control the court. Changing the rules of campaigns as they move forward. Weaponizing different institutions and hallowed institutions of our government. We mentioned earlier off air, eliminating the filibuster, which protects the minority. And this country was based on the majority and the minority being forced to work together, so there was not any tyrannical rule. The fact that, you can have fair and free elections and still have rules that people have to follow that you would follow no matter what, maybe getting a prescription at the pharmacy, very like photo ID to vote, or perhaps verified absentee and mail-in ballots. Nothing wrong with that. How about following those people who should follow referendums and constitutional amendments, but then when they lose because they tried to change the rules of the game to benefit them because their ideals and their philosophies don't work, they find find a loophole. If you agree that that's the group that is the threat to democracy and threat to our freedoms, liberties, and our Constitution, and the way we have been brought up here in the way of America, then it's the Democrats that are the threat to democracy. Perhaps maybe we may not like the language that the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, or presumptive nominee, uses from time to time. Certainly, they may disagree with maybe his mean tweets, but they certainly agree with his policies. And at the very least, he defends this Constitution. You can see his actions through the judiciary, his actions through his policies that have been put forward. But anybody, in my estimation, that changes the rules of the game or places their thumb on the scale of fairness and justice is the threat to democracy, because this is not about one man This is not about one political party. Because once you do it to that one man, whether it be Donald Trump, or you do it to a political party, Republicans and conservatives, then they're coming after the average American, the average New Yorker. And that's my problem. That's why I believe the true threat to democracy is the organized Democratic Party that runs Albany and Washington.
Eric.
Well, one of the things I find interesting is the Democrats have this talking point how Donald Trump, calls out the judiciary, threatens judges. He undermines the American judiciary system. Well, I don't think he has. I mean, obviously, he's very critical of the judges that are prosecuting him or have been running the cases that have been prosecuting him. But it's not as if the Democrats really embrace the whole idea of the integrity of the judiciary. First, of course, we talked about the lawfare and the weaponization of the criminal justice system at the beginning of the show. But let's talk about how Democrats, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, actually go right after judges. We all remember Chuck Schumer standing in front of the steps of the Supreme Court saying, calling out justices by their names. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Alito, you're going to reap the whirlwind, quote unquote. I mean, a direct threat, personal threat against Supreme Court justices. Look at the vilification of Alito right now. The goal is to try and to get conservative judges off the bench, or if they remain on the bench, to recuse themselves because they don't like what these judges do. I mean, the Supreme Court by the left has always been viewed as a legislative body. So if they can't win at the ballot box, they want to get to the Supreme Court and win at the Supreme Court.
That's why they want to threaten to pack the court.
100% right. Exactly right. Because they don't like the separation of powers. They want if they can't win at the legislature, they want to make sure they have the backstop, the fail-safe of the Supreme Court. So they go right after the Supreme Court. But so when the Supreme Court issues decisions that they don't like, they ignore them. You can't say that we care about the judiciary, the integrity of the judiciary and our institutions, and then ignore them. And there's no shortage of examples. I mean, after the Supreme Court found that Joe Biden, it was unconstitutional for him to forgive student debt. And what did he do after they made that finding? He forgave student debt again. He didn't care. There was a moratorium on paying rent. And the Supreme Court found that moratorium was unconstitutional. And Joe Biden said, he actually admitted that he realized that the Supreme Court said a moratorium on rent is unconstitutional, but I'm going to do it again because it helps me politically. So you can't really have it both ways. You can't, condemn Donald Trump for attacking these institutions or, being alleged to have attacked these institutions and then go out and attack these institutions. So that's why when I hear this stuff, you can't vote for Donald Trump. He's a tyrant. He's he's never going to leave office. He has no respect for institutions. If you made that argument to me and said on the other side was Abe Lincoln or Harry Truman, people who cared about the rule of law, then there might be something to the argument. But when you tell me this about Donald Trump and the alternative are people like Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden or the progressive left who have no use for the judiciary as it's envisioned by the Constitution, that argument kind of falls flat for me.
Well, it's very interesting because people say, what's at stake in this presidential election? Well, the ability to pack not just the Supreme Court of the United States, but all the other federal courts. The ability to pack administrative agencies, the so-called fourth branch of government, the deep state, with people who have ideological agendas. For example, telling you can't have a gas stove, you can't drive a gas-powered car, you have to cut out your refrigerator and you have to cut out your air conditioning, and the world's coming to an end because of climate change, and therefore we're going to do everything we possibly can to destroy fossil fuels, making us energy dependent, and thus a threat to our national economy and our way of life and the quality of life and our public health and safety, as well as external threats. When they do that, and they're doing this through administrative agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, for example, they weaponize the agency to put through rules that they have no right to make because they're not granted by Congress, but they do it anyway to try to put companies out of business. It's the worst kind of government control of all aspects of our life. It's called statism. And the Democrats keep talking about democracy. I didn't vote to have my gas-powered car taken away. And if you want an electric car, God bless you, buy an electric car, but let me get my gas-powered car. And stop justifying all the shutdowns of individual freedoms by some ideological pretext that's the right thing to do, and you're going to have to go along with it. Jesse.
I completely agree with the sentiments that all of us have expressed. The other thing I want to just add to it is that, the judge, I think, or you or Eric said that they were calling out the justices of the Supreme Court and such. And this is not just this goes back to the days of President Obama, when at the State of the Union address, he scolded the judiciary. And you're right. Eric was absolutely right. They're looking for the judiciary, the Supreme Court, to be another extension and branch of another branch of government. Because, again, and I say this in the simplest terms because I'm a simple guy, is that it's been my experience, and I think the experience of many who have witnessed it, and we can see that at the ballot box because they agree with me, is that the Democrats have this tendency that when they're losing at the ballot box, they change the rules. One thing I was heartened about, and if there are times when I get very depressed by how the judiciary acts, I was very heartened a couple of years ago when the Court of Appeals, the highest court of the land in New York, Democrat appointed by Democrats in that period of time, ruled and gave us fair redistricting. On the flip side of that fairness was rewarded with retribution when the court was basically thrown into chaos, and the chief justice was thrown off and pushed out of that court, so that a more like-minded, malleable, progressive could be placed in her position. But just recently, the Supreme Court, listen, they're members of that bench. I'm sure that maybe not all of them have voted for Donald Trump. Maybe none of them voted for Donald Trump in either 2016 or 2020. But when states conducted overreach and tried to keep him off the ballot by utilizing something that was dealt with in our rules and regulations for the Civil War and treasonous actions, that they ruled unanimously to have free and fair elections. So there's hope here and there, but every time the judiciary acts fairly that is contrary to Democrats, they're under the gun, under a threat personally by their being doxxed with their addresses being published, or publicly being told for people to rise up against them, or operationally by packing the court and changing the dynamics of the court.
Eric, I want to switch gears. We have a few minutes left. I want to switch gears. I want to get an update from you about the Israeli-Gaza war, the heroic action of freeing the hostages, as well as this rampant anti-Semitism that's going on across the country and worldwide. Your thoughts? In 12 seconds. No, it's in 3 minutes. Apparently in 3 minutes. Ava says 3 minutes. Go.
Yeah. Okay. So, there's rarely been any good news that's been coming out of this war, except that it does appear that when the Israelis put their mind to it, they win. And one of the great achievements of the war effort is that the Israelis successfully extracted 4 hostages out of Gaza, and for that the Israelis have been vilified. The only country in the world that if you go after your hostages and you save them from a war zone, that you open yourself up to worldwide criticism and opinion. Because when the Israelis went in there, what did they do? They went to two apartment buildings, 2 apartment complexes in central Gaza, not even in southern Gaza, in central Gaza, where 4 of the hostages were being held, 1 woman in one building, and 3 men in a building across the street. They were being held in the homes of supposedly everyday Gazan citizens, Palestinians, wealthy Palestinians in their apartments. So it demonstrates the involvement of the Palestinian civilians in the Hamas war effort. One of the homes is owned by someone who has connections to Al Jazeera, a journalist who has ties to Qatar, which is an Iranian ally. So there's this integration and there's this demonstration of the interconnectivity between Iran, Qatar, Hamas, and the civilian population. We really have to stop with this narrative that there's Hamas and then there's civilians. because in the Gaza Strip, the overwhelming majority, unfortunately, of the Palestinian people support Hamas. But in any event, so the Israelis go, they try to extract these 4 hostages. And what happens? They're shot at. Not just by Hamas, but by people in the apartment buildings. So the Israelis defend themselves. And in so doing, a number of the Palestinians are killed. So Hamas then issues a decree or a number saying something like 370 civilians have been killed. Now, of course, the international community and the American media just gobbles that up. Hundreds of Palestinians were killed. Well, those numbers are false. And it also doesn't distinguish between terrorists and true civilians, adults and children, but that's by design. There's a recent interview in the Wall Street Journal that has been published in the Wall Street Journal with Sinwar, who's the leader of Hamas, who has been quoted repeatedly as saying, what is critical to the Palestinian war effort in Gaza is that civilians die. Civilians must die so that they can advance their goals. I don't know what more we need. These are the animals the Israelis are fighting.
All right, one last word I want to say, and I think we have to continue this discussion because it's very troubling. There's rampant anti-Semitism going on worldwide.
Absolutely.
There's anti-Semitism going on all across the country. And what you really have is you have these violent demonstrators. They're calling for the death of Jews. Anybody who says, well, you know, it's not about anti-Semitism, it's only about being anti-Zionist, it's a lie, because they've been going around, they've been harassing members of the Jewish community all across this country, all across the world. The rampant anti-Semitism from European countries is rising. It's going on here. This has to stop. If we're going to live in a peaceful, civilized society, we have to call out these people for what they are. They are true fascists. They have no respect for anybody else's right of speech, of freedom of religion. They are trying to suppress dissenting voices from their agenda, and they have no knowledge of history, and they have no sense of moral compass. And this is something that we have to pay attention to, because I believe, unfortunately, we're going through a modern-day version of what happened in Germany in the 1930s, and we have to, in the words of Thomas Jefferson, pledge eternal vigilance over every form of tyranny over the mind of man. And there's Islamic terrorism, this is Islamic fundamentalism, this anti-Semitism has to be dealt with and confronted. I want to thank you for listening to Let the Record Show again. I want to thank our esteemed guest, Eric Levine, star of Screen Theater.
And soon, next Broadway.
Cartoons.
Yes.
My very good friend, Jesse Garcia, the vice chair of the State Republican Party, the county chair of Suffolk County. We thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Another great show. And thank you to our devoted listeners. Talk to you next week. Thank you.
Let the Record Show is on the air.